Hello and welcome to LARP number 8. We're doing our first interview today with Ross Scott from the channel Accursed Farms. You might recognize him from series such as Freeman's Mind and The Game Dungeon. However, we've requested his presence to discuss his war on games as a service and the recent European Citizens Initiative. Your interest in games preservation, or at least preventing the death of games, seems to have started with the game Battleforge. Did you anticipate that almost a decade later you would be leading the fight against killing games?
No, not at all. This is just real. I mean, yeah, I guess that's my public decry of it. It's actually bothered me since maybe the late 90s. But yeah, no, wouldn't have predicted any of this at all. And I was kind of hoping the industry would wake up on it, but that's not happening. So.
Where would you say it started? With something like EverQuest?
Yeah, and ironically, I've never played it, but I heard stories from people who did play it, and the concept just made me think, wow, this sounds amazing. It's like, well, wait, what if that ever got shut down? And again, ironically, that one's probably pretty safe relatively, but just conceptually, that kind of bothered me because I like games, and the thought of them just being turned off forever just never sat right with me.
Yeah, on this topic, World of Warcraft always comes up, but if you actually research World of Warcraft like I am for a video, you find that their developers talk a lot about EverQuest and how they picked up a lot of the design ideas from MMOs that were coming out in the late 90s.
Yeah, EverQuest was one of the bigger 3D ones I know of. There were some before that, but yeah, they kind of set the runway for World of Warcraft to take over the world, I guess.
So is this just like kind of fallout from the .com bubble, that era of just investing into online services?
No, I think it's just a mentality of many developers never putting any thought into the future. It's all about like now, let's ship the product. Okay, well, once we do that, we're done. And then the law has never really caught up with that. Like, well, one analogy I've made a few times is something like Uber. When that first came to many countries, governments weren't sure, like, well, wait, is this a taxi service or are these employees or contract? Like, the laws just weren't written for that. And so you think this would have been sorted out maybe 15 years ago, but video games are pretty low priority for most governments, which is understandable, but at the same time, it's an enormous industry now, so.
Yeah, I feel like now would be an appropriate time to start having these discussions, especially when you have high-profile games like Destiny on, like, death's door now. Are you aware how, like, Destiny has been vaulting some of its content and stuff over the years?
Yeah, I don't know all the details, but I've heard stories how, they'll take some levels offline and maybe we'll bring them back, fingers crossed kind of thing.
Yes.
And I think somebody was telling me one of the DLCs, they removed almost everything from it. So if you bought that DLC, you were just
not only
SOL.
Not only the DLC, so like the original campaign for Destiny 2 no longer exists. Like you cannot play it, which always seemed weird to me. How would you go about addressing something like that if we would be addressing it at all?
Well, that one's kind of a special case because it's rare for games to just have all this cool new content and then, okay, bam, now it's gone forever, but the game keeps on going. I mean, there are a few games like that, but the majority,
we're seeing it happening more and more, and I think it's a lot of the developers are saying like it's to cut down on install sizes because Destiny 2 is like, I think it's like almost 200 gigs to install that game. As games get larger and stuff, I feel like we're going to see this more often. I don't know how you really rectify it, but it would be nice if there was some way for us to be able to one day play those things.
As I understand, DLC is not something that's technically, well, not necessarily DLC, but like features and content updates are not something that's under the purview of what this initiative is offering. You're just content with a playable version of the game and not necessarily even like its finished version.
Well, it gets complicated. First, I guess the first point where, like, let's say the game runs and it used to have 12 levels, now it has 8. That's going to be extremely hard to find any sort of like legal hook to get on, because many of the lawmakers aren't even going to know what something like DLC is. So our main focus is, you bought a game or you paid money for it, and then later they just shut down the whole thing. So none of it's accessible. What you're describing is also a problem, but man, that's like, I think that's something, if it were to be addressed, it would have to be after we have at least one basic win on something as kind of a foundation for that. And
Right.
what you mentioned were DLC and purchases. See, that's another area where the legality of this is actually being examined in a few countries where, okay, like say you have something like a free-to-play game. You don't have expectation of that necessarily keeping that or sticking around because it's free. But if you buy a skin for it or a virtual sword or something, well, you paid money for that as a one-time purchase, and there's not a stated expiration date. That might meet the definition of a good in several countries. If they shut down the game, even though you're not entitled to the game, you might be entitled to those items that you bought, and they need the game to function. And that's kind of a separate lane also from what we're doing, but that does fall under what we're doing. But there's also cases where you paid once, like you say Destiny. Let's say Destiny 1. That one's easier because that one's not free to play. You bought Destiny 1, after a few years, it shuts down, and now you have a coaster. Well, that's also a problem.
You would say that preserving some of the game is more important than just hashing out the fine details now, because I think you described it in a video where you were talking about the Overton window, where us getting to talk about the fine details of how much of the game should be preserved or how quickly should these end-of-life plans be enacted is a much nicer discussion than where we're at, where we're kind of just begging them not to kill games at all.
100%. I would. That's at least, whatever we're deciding on, we're just deciding how much of the game gets preserved. We got much nicer conversation on that than you paid money, then the game's destroyed forever, and then they're going to do the same thing to the new game.
Right. So a lot of the skepticism I've seen surrounding this is the the vagueness of the initial proposal. I know you went into it in your FAQ video, but would you be able to reiterate why that was the case, why it was vague, and where you would be defining a lot more of that stuff, like these fringe cases that we're discussing right now with Destiny?
Yeah. Okay, well, first off, this is for the European Citizens Initiative. So this is only for citizens of the European Union. Like the USA, it's basically a lost cause. Like it's kind of a technically not impossible, but nothing I would ever be able to impact. For the European Citizens Initiative, its general purpose, not for anything, not just what we're doing, is there's some sort of issue that preferably a lot of people are concerned about in the European Union. The way it works is you lay out a broad proposal of something you want done. Like actually one I've seen is for having live schedules at bus stops or something. That's one that's going on right now or was. And you give a proposal of what you want done, why you think it needs to be done, and then list EU directives that show that the EU even has the authority to act on this. And what happens is you submit it to their panel, and if they decide that, yeah, okay, this is within the scope of something we might be able to do, then it gets approved. Or if the language is okay, because if you submitted a proposal let's all citizens have flying cars or something like that, that's going to get rejected because that's just not realistic on face value. So once that gets approved, if over 1 million signatures, then it goes to the EU Commission and they have to make a decision on it, and that might involve several rounds. Now, with the vagueness of it, it's not that it's vague exactly, just more like broad, where you can't get too into the details because you're not going to be making the details. It's the Citizens Initiative. The citizens are basically making their complaint known to government. It's the EU Commission or maybe other lawmaking bodies themselves that are actually going to
So
write out the law to that.
Would you agree with the sentiment that I don't need to be an airplane technician to make the complaint that we should have higher safety standards in aviation, for example?
Exactly. You do not need to be an aerodynamics engineer to complain about a Boeing plane going down. It's similar attitude.
All right. You've often stated that you don't want to be the one that has to fight for this. Why do you think it has taken this long for anyone to do anything about this practice?
Well, okay, I guess some of it could be that in the U.S., I discovered even this year, things really are so locked down, it's almost hopeless. Like the only single option I can see in the United States would be an act of Congress. And good luck for the average person or even average group of people to get something like that. So that might have kind of set the narrative on all of this. Actually, part of the reason we haven't acted until now is because there wasn't really a good opening. It wasn't until Ubisoft screwed up potentially on something that I pushed forward on all of this, because they're located in France, which plays by different rules in the United States. So I think that's part of it. The rest of it, you tell me. I mean, it makes me kind of feel like slightly crazy that I'm in a Twilight Zone episode, that I'm not the only person that cares about this. I've definitely seen that, but this strikes me as something, somebody else with more free time, or like this is their one mission or something, could spend time on this. I mean, I have lots of other things I'd rather be doing with my time, but it just kept feeling like nobody was going to do anything.
I would guess that
honestly,
everybody is waiting for their version of Battleforge to go down before they kind of get on board with championing this cause. Like, in our circle, we typically cover games that are fairly covered in terms of the end-of-life stuff, so it's not necessarily something that we're going to feel like passionate enough about to kind of champion the cause. And like you said, we all have lots of things that we're working on.
I could answer, at least, from my perspective as like a general consumer, why should I care? There's so many other games that I could play. I'm not a fan of live service games, so I don't play them. So, them disappearing and stuff, I don't even really play multiplayer games. So them disappearing, what does that matter to me? And then in the case of people who do like those games, well, there's so many other games that I can play. If the game ends up dying, well, it probably died for a reason. I probably stopped playing it. Everybody else probably stopped playing it. Why should we care? Like, what's video game preservation to me? I have so many other games that I can play and stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the apathy ends up coming from. And then you also have people who haven't, they're younger. You said you've seen this since like EverQuest and stuff. A lot of players now, gaming has only expanded like exponentially over the past few years. So you have a lot of people who just think live service games dying and stuff is business as usual. That's completely normal. And I've seen that argument being made too, that this is just normal and that we should really just accept it. At best, what these developers are liable for is making people think that they are buying a product when in fact they are getting a lease agreement to a service. So they've suggested that what we really should be doing is proposing that language becomes more obvious to the end user at point of sale, that people will know you're not purchasing a product, you're receiving a license to access that service.
Yeah, you brought up a few things there. I mean, I guess for like your mentality of like, well, okay, if I can't play this, I'll play another one.
Well, first off, I want to go on the record. That is not my mentality. I am, as a video game critic, preservation is important to me. But when I first heard this, I was torn, because on the one hand, I'm, a critic and stuff, but on the other hand, I do have a strong consumer side that I try to listen to from time to time. And that side of me was saying, who cares? You don't play live service games. So it's like, that's where I just want to go on the record and say, like, this is not, yeah.
Well, no, I can get that. I mean, I guess you're not too picky. You just want something to play. And yeah, for people like that, this may not make much sense, because you're right. We are awash in games. I guess where I'm coming from is I never know which game is going to appeal to me necessarily from, even from which genre sometimes. So if there's one that like really gets my attention, the thought of that one being destroyed, it's like, oh man. I guess the way to put it is like, think of your top 3 favorite games, and then imagine just by coincidence, okay, now those are shut down and you can never play them again. It can start stinging, and the more this happens, the more you're not cool with this at all.
A thought actually just occurred to me right now. There could be an argument to be made. So, like, one of my favorite games that is getting exceedingly hard to play is Bully, and Rockstar has not done any sort of, like, patches for it or anything, and it's a bitch to get that game to run. So there might be people who are looking at this going, yeah, but there's plenty of single-player games that are basically unplayable because, they were on DOS or something like that. So why should we care about these if those games are basically extinct as well?
Well, I guess my view is going to be biased on this, but I have never run into an old game I wasn't able to eventually get working with enough time thrown at it. See, that scenario is talking something that's just more a pain in the ass to get working. It's like, oh, okay, so I need to like get a virtual machine going, or else I'm gonna have to find all these wrappers, or maybe just I even need to like dig up old hardware in a few cases.
I'm going to bring up, last episode we had a guest, Salty Shrimp Pasta, who is a Zoomer. He was born, I don't know when he was born, probably after 2000 or something. He's real young. He was a kid that was into like the Battlefield games and stuff. And, he's a big old graphics chaser, DICE fanboy. And one day he randomly got into Daggerfall, which is a game that's older than I am. He really loves Daggerfall. So I think that you have a good angle on that. There's some of these old games that you're going to really just love and not ever get to play. And he played the DOS version to prove a point. So even somebody that is like on the younger side can still get into these older games and figure out how to run them.
Yeah, that's something like I would almost consider that sort of thing in the future. Probably my number 2 concern about preservation is when you have stuff, particularly for consoles. I guess it could happen on PC too, where it's designed for that hardware, but the console's been discontinued, but emulation never cracked it. So that means as time goes on, those consoles become rarer and rarer and rarer, so that it's gonna be a lot harder to access this game. Thankfully, we're not at that phase too badly in the present day, but I could see this becoming an issue as time goes on.
Yeah, Xbox is notorious for that issue. I think that's why they are big on like backwards compatibility and stuff. But what happens one day when they just stop supporting backwards compatibility for Xbox?
Yeah, Microsoft likes to flip back and forth between being pro backwards compatibility and being anti backwards compatibility. Yeah. You don't know which version of Microsoft you're getting that week.
Yeah, they've definitely had a checkered past. I guess another thing you mentioned was the normalization of this, especially for younger people, because yeah, that could be all they've known for the most part. Although Minecraft, maybe, geez, I guess pre-Microsoft Minecraft, now I don't know, but that's one where you can kind of host the game and run that without.
Even today, they still give you comprehensive access to like every version of the game that was ever made.
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't the new Baldur's Gate 3 support like hosting your own game for like a co-op? Yeah, so, but that's not the big popular stuff necessarily, especially for younger people, where all they've known is the game's always online, and then eventually the company shuts down, then the game goes. And see, that's seen as normal, whereas from my perspective,
those are like the
since
Matrix
I'm older,
pod people, like they're just, you got to wait for them to wake up before you can even really get your foot in the door on convincing them that, hey, you should play something other than Call of Duty.
The problem is it'll be too late by then. Yeah, it's a conundrum because it'll be too late by then. But see, I'm older, so I remember lots of multiplayer just coming with the server. And so, okay, you want to host the game? Fine. And, the company shut down? Well, we can still play the game. I mean, what was it? Epic delisted and shut down the servers to, was it Unreal Tournament 2003-04 last year? You can still run all those games with other people online. So
Battleforge was unofficially revived under the name Skylords Reborn, released December of 2020. Have you had the chance to replay it?
Not yet, but I kind of got my full worth out of it at the time, so that one's like lower on the priority list for me. But I am aware of it.
It purportedly came with all of the features of the original game, with an economy overhaul that removed the requirement to buy microtransactions to progress, and it adds new features like achievements, balance patches, and apparently even new content.
I think that one's great, but that's kind of the exception to the rule, where they managed to reverse engineer that. I continue to be in awe of the geniuses who can figure out that sort of thing, because that is not. I mean, it took them years to get to that point. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I've seen an argument being made that because you have people who are able to do that, people like to point out World of Warcraft's people being able to host private servers with that. That why should we even bother with this legislation if like modders and stuff are able to figure it out after the fact anyways?
Well, World of Warcraft is first. It's if either now or it used to be one of the most popular games in the world. So that's a game that's gonna have a lot of eyes on it. The second is, I'm not sure on this. I've never found the full history on it, but I believe the emulators might have been the result of leaked code.
The story I heard was that one of the server blades at Blizzard was accidentally sold, and the person who bought it was able to get their hands on the server code that way.
Yeah, see, that makes a big difference. If that sort of thing happens. That's not what happens.
And the story behind that
games.
is that a lot of the WoW private servers still had the wrong data. It was not an accurate recreation of what they were doing because they had to guess on a lot of the like enemy stats, their resistances, how their AI pathing and all that stuff. There was a ton of guesswork with that.
Yeah, I mean, to me it's just the analogy I made in one of my videos was that trying to reverse especially without the code to work off of like that, trying to reverse engineer that is kind of like trying to using Enigma to crack the Germans' code in World War II. And then after I made that video, I got several comments saying, no, it's more complicated. So it's just dumb luck when that happens.
Yeah, so I've recently been messing with Starfield's creation kit, and they released the tools to mod the game, but they did not release any documentation to go along with it. So we've all been trying to just like reverse engineer, and let me tell you how frustrating and like hopeless of an experience that is. And that's with the official tools, like and being able to modify whatever I really want. It's still like very complicated. So I can't imagine. I used to make
videos in the Source engine, so I know about this.
Speaking
sort of
older MMOs, you've covered The Secret World, an MMO that was released in 2012 and is still around today. Would you consider the fact that it and other MMOs such as Guild Wars are evidence that maintaining central servers long-term without a large player base is still an easily viable business model?
Not necessarily. I don't know the server cost, and that could vary wildly from company to company. I don't want companies to have to be on the hook like that. I mean, I want them, hey, if they made a game but it's a flop, fine. I think it is reasonable they should be able to shut it down when they want. It's just that you got to look at the other half of that the buyer shouldn't be deprived of everything as a result of that.
Right, because I've been seeing people looking at this initiative saying, oh, you just want them to keep the servers running in perpetuity, which I don't know how they ever even came to that conclusion, but that's been a takeaway I've been seeing online.
Oh, I think it's because that's all they know. Either the game is run by the company and it works, or it's shut down and that's it. I think there's not an awareness. There are options to patch it or release local or, make server emulators or have local hosting, that sort of thing.
So like the big argument from the people who are more informed are saying that it's too unreasonable. It's going to be too difficult for developers running a game right now to retroactively create these sorts of patches and stuff. League of Legends was a popular one to be brought up. A lot of the code and stuff operates on the server. So in order to make that work, you either have to release like server binaries or something like that, make it so that people can host their own servers, or find a way to get all that stuff onto the client instead. And people are just saying that that would be too difficult. It's unreasonable to expect developers to, like patch that into their games.
That could be completely valid. That depends a lot on the game. Yeah, I mean, if you spent years having no provisions for this whatsoever, it could not only be impractical, but it could, in some cases, it could be legally impossible in the current state, because they could be using middleware or other licenses that company has the permission to use, but then they can't just release that binary or the source to other players because they're contractually bound. And we acknowledge that. A lot will depend on the EU's response and if we get enough signatures. But one option which would be less than ideal, but it would have compliance, would be if it passed like exactly as it is, there would be the option of shutting down the game before that law went into effect to still be in compliance. Another option,
as I understand, retroactive enforcement is not something that's being looked for. So League of Legends is not on the table as something that's going to need to have an end of life plan.
Well, it could be because let's say the law went into effect like 2028 or something. Well, if League of Legends probably is still operating by then, if they're collecting money after that date, then they are on the hook. So, however, that said, one option, I can't speak for the members. Officially I'm not a part of this, even though I've been a strong driving force in all of this. One option I would consider if I was a member would be, okay, if this is going to be so disruptive to the industry, we can't do this, even with having a shutdown date and years notice, that sort of thing. I'd be willing to entertain the option of grandfathering in existing games prior to that date. So because League of Legends was operating before that date, well, that's it. They get it for life. But then if Riot wanted to start a new game, that one would have to have some sort of end-of-life plan if it's an online-only game for whenever they eventually shut it down.
Right, because the concern is that people who are paying into the game after the law takes into effect, they would, in essence, be getting screwed over. They would not have the protection of this new law.
Yeah, I mean, the grandfathering is not my first option because that will kill a lot of games. However, I recognize this could be hell for a lot of developers and publishers for some games. Other games, it could be as simple as like an hour patching or something. It varies so wildly.
One game that I'm aware of that requires a lot of server power is Elite Dangerous. That game does a lot of procedural generation, and almost all that procedural generation happens on the server. And it's a very complicated procedural generation system that they spend like a decade working on. So I can't imagine a game like that being able to transition to like an entirely client-based thing. However, it does have like solo play, and I think it even has like private, like you can host some sort of private. It's not as server dependent as you would think, but once again, it's like you said, it varies from developer to developer.
I would think procedural generation would affect solo play just as much, but unless it's like a fixed campaign, where you're only in this star system for this level. And
well, it's because it's like it's kind of a multiplayer game. It blends the lines. There is a multiplayer component, but you can also play single player. But if people are going around generating planets and stuff, if I'm playing solo, I'll still see what they generated. So it's like it creates this constant sort of universe for every player. So that's why I kind of needed the server dependency, because I imagine that's a huge amount of just data to store.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of MMOs that have just massive requirements in order to run it. The approach to that, this is also another answer where it kind of depends on what the EU says or decides, that sort of thing. So I can't put to 100%, but another compromise I think would be reasonable would be a best effort attempt by the publisher or the developer where, okay, we're not going to have a build where we just patch it and you run it and that's it, because that might not be physically possible. on, home systems for some of these games. But we could release, especially in the future, like the server binaries for that server shard, and the community can figure it out. Or, again, would not be mandatory, but one option would be like the server source code. Or possibly, if we want to be pretty generous, repair instructions, which could involve things to give the server emulator groups a real fighting chance, where they decrypt the packets, or they document the packets, all the protocols. They get rid of the DRM. They remove any encryption on the client, that sort of thing, and then just give all their notes on it. So even if they couldn't give out everything, they could give them a major head start to give it a chance. Okay, another option would be that, especially for future games, if it's a known end-of-life plan, but the game itself has higher aspirations, they think, okay, we're going to patch this so that instead of being able to host thousands of players, you can a system can still run it, but it can only host 100 or 50. And yeah, that's a reduced experience. That's not the same. And for some people, that there might be no point, but that's a world apart of not being able to run it ever again.
So that was actually my next question. How would you respond to the criticism that social elements of online games are the features, so if it's not hosted on the central server, then it cannot be preserved?
Well, that's true. However, it depends. Yeah, if we're talking total preservation, that's true. But it's going to vary with each player what they like about the game and what appeals to them about it. Because, look, like you were talking earlier, a lot of these games are merging the single player and the multiplayer. Like Destiny, that had a full single player campaign. Well, what if the person was never that interested in playing the multiplayer, but they wanted to play that single player campaign? Or what if instead of having, hundreds of players on there with a vibrant economy, they don't have that, but they have a group of 4 friends who enjoy playing it. And that for them, that's the majority of it. So I think it would be delusional to expect full services, because those other players populating the server are part of the appeal. Well, that's all takes real people being on there. I'm not trying to prevent the popularity of games from dying off. I mean, that's going to happen. That's inevitable for every game, pretty much. But that's a force of nature kind of thing, not, well, we designed the game so that you need this code that we're withholding in order to run it.
My take on this, as somebody who's covering vanilla WoW, is that it's akin to how the ESRB will say it whenever you boot up a multiplayer game, that the online experience is not considered when they did the age rating, right? There's no such thing as a consistent online social element that can be preserved or even be consistently experienced when the game was active. So, for example, there are multiple valid interpretations of what World of Warcraft's social element was, depending on what time period you played the game in, depending on what realm you played on, and what time of day you played on it. Some of those experiences, when you played even World of Warcraft back in 2005, were effectively single player.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's something where it takes real people continually playing the game to experience. Or again, like you said, some things they can't be re-experienced because the conditions at the time were the same as such, or like things weren't known about the game. So
what I'm getting at is that as somebody who's covering the MMO that was made, I don't consider it a valid criticism of the game's preservation aspect, because the games are so much more than just their social experience. You have, WoW dungeons, you have the music, you have the zone design, you have the quests and storytelling. The social aspect for me is like less than 5% of the appeal.
Well, for other people, it could be inverted. But the thing is, that's a subjective assessment. What we're going for is objective. Can you run the game? That's a very objective metric, I think. I had another thought, but I think I lost it, so that's all right.
Were there any interesting effects from the mailing campaign to EA you did after the Darkspore video?
No, not at all. That was me being naive, where I thought, well, it was two things. It wasn't quite as badly naive as you might think, because I'm not sure, maybe somebody in your audience knows this. what was the first game like this to shut down that was bought originally as a one-time purchase? The earliest I know of might have been Battleforge. So this was still when we finally had like our first kind of confirmed casualty, because there were lots of dead games before that, but those vast majority of those were subscription games where but the point is the people from the beginning could have bought that game in a store, paid for it once, and then, a couple of years later, okay, now it's dead forever. And that was still, those particular dynamics were still pretty fresh. It might have been the first, I'm not sure. So you can excuse some of my naivete for that at the time.
Right. Would you consider the failure of the mailing campaign to be a good sign that preventing the death of games through direct consumer action against the corporations is an ineffective solution to the overall problem?
Oh, 100%. Now, the part I was just plain naive on, even for the time, was that I wasn't considering that they would have all these filtering systems to ensure that people with influence at EA never see those messages.
Right.
So it would have just it would have just gone down a well, all the complaints. That part is on me. But see, again, that was just at the beginning. Now the horse is out of the barn. It's no longer.
Well, would you say that was kind of you
yeah.
proving that we're not going to solve the problem just by like asking the corporations to stop?
Yeah. Well, again, I wouldn't have even. I think I wouldn't have even thought there was a chance of that. Maybe even 3 years later, or something like that, because it could be the sort. There was still some level of doubt in my mind that maybe somebody at the company doesn't realize how this is going down. That like, oh wow, we actually are eliminating this for everybody. So if they realize that, then they would realize, oh wait, oops, that was a mistake on our part, and correct it. Now there's absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever that they just don't care at all, or the companies that do just take the initiative themselves and give the games their own end of life plan, which is easily the minority.
So Pirate Software in his video indicated that you should call out specific companies for tacking multiplayer onto single player games, then shutting down the single player component. Would you say from your experience how effective calling out companies is for this practice?
Well, not only that, I think it's not only ineffective, but I think I'm not aware of any cases where that's actually worked. It might have worked for some other issues where but for ones where the game was going to die, and then there was an uproar, and then the developer or the publisher says, oh, okay, we'll release something. There might be a few of that, but let's say there were a few cases like that. The point is, we're talking about hundreds of games. That's just not even practical. And I think the vast majority of them are going to say no, or just not even reply at all, because there's no legal obligation for them to do so currently.
Well, it's an especially easy thing for someone in our positions to say, because we're content creators with influence. If you're just a normal fan, you're going straight to the spam inbox.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, it's taken me months on this campaign to get anywhere. The thought of, it was simply impossible to do that for just every single company and every single game that's getting shut down. Like it's with that kind of effort.
Do you think that just because this initiative has been getting a lot of traction, I even saw Linus Tech Tips talking about it. Do you think because it's gotten so much attention now, even if the initiative does not pass, there might be some sort of meaningful change in the industry?
Well, yes and no. The initiative is not the only action we've been doing. The other action that it's only come up recently. The other actions we were doing prior to this were petitioning other governments directly. I think that's iffier, but we'll see. But the thing that I think potentially has more teeth is taking this to the consumer protection agencies themselves, like particularly in France, Germany, Australia, are the big ones. That one, I give coin toss odds. I have no idea. So it could be this initiative is entirely redundant, which would make me thrilled. But so if the initiative so the initiative could fail, but then France comes out and says, yeah, actually the games seem to be behaving more like goods under the law, so therefore they're subject to those laws. Oh man, that would be such a massive victory. But let's say that fails and the initiative fails. No, my view is biased, but I think that's it. I think this is dead forever, or at least for my lifetime. Like, it's taken so much. It's been an uphill battle every single step of the way on this, because just at all fronts, basically.
Have you had to contend with developers and studios and publishers and stuff fighting this yet? Or is that going to happen once like the lawmakers start getting involved?
That would be later with the lawmakers for the initiative. I mean, thankfully, that's the nice part about going through consumer protection agencies is they're not there really, at least my understanding, they're not there really to consult the other parties of this. They're there to interpret the law. So they might ask the developers, okay, well, publishers, did you do this? Okay, well, why did you do this? And they're just going to basically fact gathering and then decide for themselves whether this represents a violation. It's like that Uber metaphor I mentioned earlier. Where
so if they come to a decision, basically what they would be doing is establishing precedent, right?
It's more complicated than that in the EU, but they would establish precedent for that particular situation, I think. So that way, if they rule that, all right, this game got shut down, lots of people complained, okay, we've decided this goes against like French law or something, so we're going to give you a fine. And that's kind of going to be like a warning to every other company that does this. And so if another company does it and you send complaints, it's going to be a lot easier for them to get a fine. And hopefully the fine's big enough to be some sort of deterrent.
So that was kind of going into my next question. How active have game developers been in discussions about these legislative proposals?
I have no idea. It couldn't have been that active until recently.
Were you speaking with game developers prior to starting the initiative?
Not really, because here's the thing. It's kind of like the people who are on board with this, they're not even the problem in the first place. See, that's the thing. Most games would not be subject to this. Any game that when support ends, you can run it without having to connect to the publisher, it's already safe under this. It's just completely unaffected. So the main problem is from developer. I tend to say publishers more because a lot of developers would want something like this, stuff they spent years of their life working on, to be preserved, but they don't get to make those decisions. The publisher often does, especially for bigger games. So the publishers have made it extremely clear they don't care about this. They're going to keep doing this, and that's the end of it. So I just didn't even see the point. I mean, it's like, well, have you talked to your bully about who likes to jump you after school or something? It's like, well, I could, but what's the point? He's just waiting there to beat me. So it's kind of like that, you know.
Have you spoken with developers at least on trying to get insight on how much effort it would be to convert a live service game into something that's single player?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, a few of the members of the initiative are developers themselves. Like, at least one's a game developer, another one's for server software. There's like a long background in this sort of thing. Yeah, if anything, it pisses them off more because they really know better.
I think that's an important thing, because a big pain point for some people just now finding out about this movement is the assumption that you have not been speaking with game developers this entire time, and so you don't have a basis to make these arguments.
I think it goes back to, maybe I forgot to mention this one. The primary focus of this campaign is for future games. You know, we don't want to, but I would be willing to compromise on things like grandfathering in games, you know, or having lighter requirements or that sort of thing. You can quote me on this. I am in favor of any solution that solves this problem. The thing I found about the developers who are much more standoffish about this or against it is they're really looking at the present. Like you mentioned earlier, like, hey, we have these licenses for our game. We can't give those out. And you're proposing we give those out. You don't know what you're talking about. This is stupid. Well, it's okay. Maybe for that game, it is impossible. But does that mean you can't? A game you're going to start making in 2 to 3 years, it isn't possible? especially if the law is in place saying there's going to be a penalty if you don't have that kind of provision. So I think they got to look forward more.
Right. Do you think you could have done more to indicate what developer insights you've managed to gather over the years in support of this movement?
I mean, I guess it's just, it all seems backwards to me because, again, you go to early 2000s or late 90s, every non-MMO game, you were getting all this already. So it's like we've regressed from that. And there are reasons to have everything on a central server. I get that. But then there was just no consideration for what happened after that. So I almost see this as negligence. And I see a lot of the developers that should know better on this because it's like they're just ignoring history on it. Now, again, with MMOs, they can be a different animal. But we've seen server emulators emerge. And some developers do the right thing. Like Saga of Rhizome is a MMO. They just released their server code, and now that game's safe. So
I've got another WoW anecdote. So around 2000, 2001, the game's director, Alan Adham, and a few of the designers were having this discussion about World of Warcraft potentially being an offline game, and then you would connect online when you wanted to do social stuff, like go to dungeons or trade with people. But you could play World of Warcraft offline. They were talking about this because of Diablo 2. So that was on the table in development, that World of Warcraft would have been a functional video game without a central server.
I see this less as... I mean, the thing is, most businesses operate just to make money. I mean, especially bigger ones. It's kind of more the exception to the rule. You have businesses that are kind of doing things at a loss because it's better for the game or better for the players. Especially like the bigger the company is, the more true I think that is. These aren't even really considerations about like what's best for the player. It's just that how can we monetize things as much as humanly possible? And if we have no requirement to let the player keep their purchase, then we won't. So I think it's really that simple.
You mentioned earlier how this like sort of initiative, this sort of legislation is basically impossible in the US. Why is that? Because I know there is basically precedents already set for things like Microsoft 365 and like Adobe's Suite, where basically they get away by saying that you're just getting the license and stuff. So it goes back to that argument. So I'm just curious, like, is that, like, has there been precedent set on that and that it applies to video games now? Like, just like
Yes.
What's going on in the US?
We were lucky enough to get some pretty high-end pro bono legal research in the US. And what they found was that there was a court case in the late 90s called Pro CD versus Zeidenberg. There's some details to it, but the general conclusion was the courts thought, okay, this stuff is complicated about like what the customer rights are versus what the end user license agreement says. So in order to keep this simple, we're just going to defer to the end user license agreement, that whatever that says goes, unless it's something insane, like contains your firstborn child as part of the payment. I'm simplifying this a lot. You can look up the case if you want to get into the details of that.
You talk about it in your games as a services fraud video. You talk about the various conflicting precedents that have been set.
For the record, I screwed up partially on that video. Pretty much everything I said about the law in that video, U.S. law, in that video, you can throw out. I was wrong on that. All the other points I think stand, but that part I screwed up.
Right.
Again, this is only something I found out this year. That was adopted, Pro CD versus Heisenberg was adopted by that circuit court, and then all the other districts pretty much referenced it favorably or adopted some version of that themselves. So while it hasn't technically been tested under the Supreme Court, I would say you have better odds of winning the lottery than you are of that being successful. So in the United States, the law of the land is effectively whatever the end user license agreement says, and they cover their bases 6 ways to Sunday. I've even heard cases saying, oh, well, you should try in the state level. Nope. They can circumvent state law because they'll say that, okay, if you have a dispute, by playing this game, you agree that you'll settle this by arbiter in California. So even if, no matter what state you're in, it's going there. So maybe if you made progress in California, you could do this, but that's going to be pretty Silicon Valley friendly, I would imagine. So I've seen writing and from lawyers I've talked to, they basically all come to the same conclusion. The only way to solve this is through an act of Congress. And I don't have the resources for that. I can't even imagine what that would take.
Yeah, getting Congress to do anything is a wild proposition, let alone something that they would probably see as superfluous. You know, it's those silly video games. We've got to do real congressional stuff like nothing.
Yeah, well, it'd also become a partisan issue too, so.
This is kind of a fringe issue, and I get that. There are more important things for, governments to deal with.
I'm going to tip my hand here a little bit. I disagree. I don't think it's a fringe case issue because as I just brought up with Microsoft, Microsoft Office 365, Adobe's, their whole suite, there's tons of other software companies and stuff that are migrating to this model of you don't own the software, you just have a license for it. But as far as I'm aware, that has still not been legally codified in the United States. It's just something that exists in this legally gray area. So the more that we fight that in basically every arena, the better shot, because it's against the consumer's best interest. There really is no real benefit for why I can't own Photoshop anymore. That doesn't make any sense. It worked perfectly fine for, 2 decades. Why is it something I can't own it? And you're seeing this spreading more and more. More companies are accepting like subscription-based models and stuff. Like BMW is testing out heated seats as a subscription, and this is going to keep spreading, and this is going to become more normalized. That people are just not going to own things; they're just going to be leasing. Like, what's the difference then? Why can't my refrigerator be on a lease program then? It just continues to snowball from there, and that's why I think something like this. I think this is why people should care about this more than they are.
Yeah, it's there's a different aspect there. What you're describing, I think, is even harder than what we're doing because
absolutely.
we're prepared to lose on subscription games because how many games is that now? I mean, it might even be less than 10. But maybe
mandatory or optional subscriptions, because the popular thing now is
mandatory.
Throwing it, calling it a free-to-play or a pay-to-play game, and then throwing in and
no. See, that's different than how you're charged. See, that makes a big difference under the law how it's sold.
Right.
See, because with a subscription game, that kind of meets the definition. Even though, I agree completely, this screws the consumer, but that kind of does meet the definition of a service, where they tell you, okay, like with Adobe, you got your 30 days. Your access is gonna end after 30 days, and that's it. Well, that's how something like Netflix works, or music rental thing, but see, with the games that we're covering, or a lot of the ones we're focused on, you paid once and you weren't giving an expiration date. Well, that's a lot like a good, but it's confusing. That's the reason we have gotten so far under the consumer protection agencies, because
I'll give you a little
it's so hostile.
With something like World of Warcraft, while you do pay monthly and you lose access, there was an upfront service charge for, say, expansions like the Burning Crusade, where some of that content is no longer accessible, despite the fact that they charged money for they've charged money for it, both like a service and like a good. And there's digital goods within World of Warcraft that are one-time purchases.
There are, but that one, you're talking about like the deepest areas of like the gray zone on this, where because you can make the counter argument that you paid money for like a horse or something in World of Warcraft, and yes, you lose access to that, but at the same time, we told you when you were going to lose access to that, even though that's from your account. So could it be interpreted as that, this is really just a service upgrade, but you're still paying for the service? Honestly, there is some logic behind that. Again, I don't like any of this, but I'm trying to just approach this realistically, what would the logic be of the court? And again, that's like, that's pea soup thick for trying to figure that part out. We're willing to lose on that aspect of it because it's so few games that if we could save 99% of others, then I could live with that.
I'll jump ahead in questions because this one's relevant to the topic. Do you believe in the legitimate possibility that every publisher will turn their games into subscription models in the face of regulation?
I highly doubt that, and if they did, I do not think it would last long.
That is one of the craziest counter arguments I've heard to this whole situation.
Yeah, well, I mentioned in my video we've kind of been here already with the MMOs of the 2000s. Look, there were way more subscription-only games in the mid to late 2000s than there are now, because everybody was trying to get on board the World of Warcraft train, but there's only so much of a market for that because a lot of people don't like paying money every month for a game. Or if they do, it's just going to be one game and it needs to be really good. I mean, they could try, but I think it would crash and burn like it did before. So I'm not too worried about that. But I guess here's the other thing. Why aren't they trying that now? You know, because that's a very profitable model if you can pull it off.
They kind of are, because there are a lot of games that are doing pseudo subscription models where, sure, you can play for free, but we've got all of these convenience features that are basically the actual game if you just throw us $12 a month. So a prominent example that we covered was Fallout 76. Fallout 76 has a sticker price, but it also has a service called Fallout First that provides various luxury amenities, including the ability to run it as a single-player game. Not offline the servers, but run your own private server where you could play it as though it were, say, Fallout 4.
And it would also give you access to like things that are basically like console commands and mods from Fallout 4. But the thing is that Fallout First and Fallout 76 isn't even the most egregious of those. It's actually pretty tame compared to what I've seen other games doing.
In my eyes, I think they run into a dead end no matter which route you take if we have this law in place. Because, okay, you mentioned they have the sticker price. Oh, well, now they're on the hook for that. But let's say they get rid of the sticker price, make it free to play. Well, then if they have microtransactions that you buy once, well, then they could be on the hook for that. But let's say, okay, fine, we're not going to do that. We're just going to have the free to play and the subscription. Well, then, I mean, the subscription is going to compete with a lot of others. And for every game that doesn't do that, that's going to seem more appealing, you know, where the games where you do just pay once and that's it, you have your game. So it's like the market. So on 2 out of 3, the initiative would cover it. And then on the third one, the market would cover it. So I'm not that worried.
What if they made all their microtransactions consumables?
The microtransaction consumable.
Yeah, like all you can buy with a microtransaction is a limited time, like 2-hour XP boost or something. So,
or it's an item, or it's a seasonal item or something like, or they do like surfer wipes every so often.
So they have that whole.
Well, I guess that probably would be covered, but you have to question how profitable is that going to be from a psychological standpoint. Like, what would you rather buy as a player? Some skin that's going to last on your account as long as the game lasts? So it seems indefinitely. It might be a year, it might be 10 years. You don't know. Or one that you buy this and that's it. It's gone after like 3 months or something. I think... I don't know. I guess this is kind of a how low can we go kind of thing.
We're definitely out in the weeds on this one.
Yeah.
I feel like the next thing to ask is, what about the games that use intermediate currencies where you don't buy the thing directly? What you buy is Bethesda bucks, and then with your Bethesda bucks, you buy the microtransaction thing.
I think that would be close enough, flying close enough to still count, because you would still need access to your Bethesda bucks. And if they were sold under the premise of being... Yeah, I guess that one might be a loophole.
They just have to run a central server that says, hey, you can look at your balance of Bethesda bucks. There's your good that you bought.
Yeah, I guess if you bought the Bethesda... But yeah, that one does get deep into the gray zone too, because if you bought the Bethesda bucks and they shut them down, but then there's something else you can spend the Bethesda bucks on, geez.
Well, that's actually true. You can use the Bethesda bucks between Skyrim, Fallout 4, and Starfield.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I just came up with an even worse idea. What if they converted all of their microtransactions to NFTs? So you can cash it out as an NFT.
Well,
at
remember
any
how
given time.
Ubisoft was going hard in on
I'm
NFTs,
not
and then
even
as
worried
soon
about
as like
that.
this conversation came up, they were like, actually, maybe we shouldn't be selling ownership of skins to players.
NFTs have never made any sense to me, so whatever. They can handle that themselves.
Let's get back to the saving some games discussion. And
I want to give you an out here real quick, because you don't have all the answers, and that's what I've been hearing, is that like nobody here has all the answers, so why are we even really discussing this? And I mean, I think that's
listen, if you can't,
that's
no,
I'm
just going to say it now. If you can't stop every plane from crashing, what makes you think you can regulate planes at all?
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same
logic,
argument. Yeah, it's the same logic. But so, like, what is the process if this was to pass? Because you keep mentioning that there are people who are going to be representing this. Like, what does that look like?
If we pass the signature threshold, then the organizers are going to go to Brussels for the EU Commission, and then a few things could happen. There is a possibility they just reject it all outright. That's going to look very bad politically, because this is right in line with consumer rights. In fact, I think they have planned obsolescence laws coming down the pipeline for regular goods. So that would be kind of an impressive scandal in gaming, I guess, politically.
I would also say it's also in our favor right now, because you have all that stuff that was going on with the FTC, the European version of like the FTC and stuff, with all these video game mergers and stuff. They're looking at games a lot more, they're scrutinizing the industry a lot more. They're realizing just how big it is and what's going on. And as well, you have the push back against like big tech and stuff. So I think there is very good reason, like it's very unlikely that they're going to outright dismiss it.
I would bet money they don't. I mean, that's about how my confidence level in that. And yeah, actually, what you mentioned, in Australia, actually, their Consumer Protection Agency was already planning to go after the games industry. There was an article about that for late this year or 2025. But that's more focused on loot boxes and targeting children. So we're trying hard to piggyback onto that initiative. Like, hey, can you move a little over to the right while you're at it? You know,
I've heard of similar initiatives in, I think it was either the Netherlands or Belgium.
Probably Belgium.
Belgium, yeah.
And ironically, the United States.
So it's like, have you looked at those initiatives they were going after loot boxes and stuff, but have you looked at those initiatives and those proposals and stuff to see like if there's anything that you could use or anything like that, if there's any precedence that's already been set?
Yeah, we looked at them. I'm drawing a blank now. I think, well, not precedence, no, but the tactics with it. Mm-hmm. I think it was basically, I think that one had enough organic uproar on gambling laws that I think it looks like it was semi-grassroots, where, you know, it was people in various countries saying, hey, you know, these are gambling mechanics of my kid, and my kid was playing the game and he spent 3,000 euros on it, and like, can you do something about this? They complained to their representatives, and that made its way to the EU, as best I can tell.
In the case of the United States, it was a fresh Republican senator, and of course he took the angle of, will you please think of the children that are being affected by these gambling proposals?
I think there was one in Hawaii too, or was that the same one?
There was. I don't remember the context of what was going on in Hawaii, but this was a U.S. Senator.
The most I heard was some politicians talking about it, and then that's it. That I lost track of everything after that.
Well, the relevant part is that as soon as even the threat of regulation came up, the industry dropped loot boxes like a rock. Within 3 months, almost everybody was cutting loot boxes out of their games. So I think it's an effective sign that even the threat of legislation... Yeah, and there's precedent for that, because...
There's not still loot boxes going on in big games?
There are a few games that are still doing loot boxes, but for the most part, they've been phased out and replaced by battle passes.
Okay, news to me then.
There's precedence for this because back in the 90s when they were doing the violent video games regulation,
Yeah.
the video games industry banded together and started the ESA, which would run the ESRB and do age ratings, trying to basically show that they're doing enough self-regulation that the federal government doesn't get involved. So we have instances of where it's even just the threat that the government is going to crack down on the party gets the game industry back in line.
That's too optimistic for my mental space.
Right.
Yeah, because there's the aspect, and this is one of my concerns as well initially, is that I'm always skeptical of government intervention and things like that. I don't know how it works over in Europe, but over here it doesn't always go over well. So introducing more regulation and stuff always makes some people over here very nervous, and usually becomes a non-starter for certain individuals. And
I get that. However, I guess they will not be comforted by me saying that from me and the other organizers involved, like from our perspective, having a game you like destroyed is basically the worst thing that can happen in gaming. So as this practice is increasing and the industry is promising to have more of it, we don't have much to lose. So we're prepared to risk imperfect government intervention because they're destroying our games. So it's like, okay, well, this is, I mean, I consider this the last resort. I mean, yeah, if I fail on this initiative and these regulatory bodies looking into it, like, I'm done. I don't see any other option on this. I will have lost straight out. So this is, if they even do something and it's weird and it only saves half games, well, that's a hell of a lot better than where we are now, from where we're looking at it.
So, like, Pat mentioned that he mentioned the whole loot box thing and everything, and it kind of like happened around, was it like Battlefront 2?
It was Battlefront 2017.
Yeah.
The loot boxes were so egregious that was where a lot of the regulation started, was in response to that game.
See, yeah, so I remember, I didn't remember the regulation aspect of it, but I remember the outrage aspect. Like, people were pissed everywhere. People were in uproar. And I figured, because I noticed that loot boxes started to diminish after that, and I figured it was just because gamers started to rise up. They started to make their voices heard that they thought loot boxes were just, not good anymore. And they basically were saying that, hey, if you keep putting loot boxes into these games, we're going to keep, like, review bombing your games and stuff. We're going to boycott them and everything else. And I just assumed that a lot of the changes were just in response to that it's just really unpopular now. So that's why I asked earlier that, like, if you think even if this does not pass, there might still be some sort of change, just because if we're able to get a large enough discussion going about this and people are able to voice their opinions enough, maybe some developers and publishers will look at it and be like, it's going to just be really, really unpopular if we keep doing things like this. It'd be great PR if we could come out before the game even launches and say, hey, we got an end of life plan for this. Like, we heard you guys, we listened.
I'm so much more cynical on that. I mean, I think that could happen for a couple games that come out. Yeah. But see, like I said, everything's been an uphill battle on this. And see, the difference between loot boxes and what we're doing is loot boxes affected your gameplay from day one. Like, you're ready to play the game, and then bam, now this is turning into a slot machine, and it's detracting from the game itself, and they want more money. So this is pissing you off because you've already paid money. What we're talking about is, it's kind of a long tail situation. By the time this stuff hits, the player base has dwindled. So it's always a minority of people that care the most about this. Because it's the sort of thing where the people who are affected by it, I think the vast majority of them aren't going to get it until it's too late. So, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, however long the games last, yeah, that's when they notice. But by then, there's so little precedent to operate with, and then there's not enough of a critical mass for an uproar. So it's just been uphill on this every single way. With gamers, with government, with people understanding the problem, just all of it. The definition of the law.
I have a question that's tangentially related to what we were talking about. What do you think of the notion that government is not knowledgeable enough about the games industry to regulate it?
I actually think that works in our favor in the sense that I would rather have a bureaucrat who understands the law and knows nothing about games handling this than someone who's like in the industry and has their own perception of how games work and forgot that you used to have all this stuff included in your games anyway and just assume it's the way it is. Because I think we're going to get a fair hearing that way. They're just going to look, because they're going to understand consumer law that, okay, you paid money for this. They didn't tell you how long it was going to last. And then now they've taken it away. Well, okay, yeah, that does sound like it could be a violation because I forgot if I mentioned it. The how it's sold makes a big difference because like the subscription games that, they state when they end, but these other games, they don't. And that's not many services that operate that way. If you get a gym membership that they tell you when it ends, or if you get a warranty for a washer or something, well, they tell you 1 year or 5 years or something. They don't just say, yeah, you have a warranty, but we're not going to tell you how long it is, and we're not going to tell you when it expires. I mean, that would get you in trouble in other industries. So I would prefer someone who's just kind of impartial to this and just understands the law.
Right.
Well, I can see from the opposite perspective where people would want more somebody who is more savvy. They would want a more nuanced discussion of this because they're going to argue that games are different. Games are a fringe case sort of thing, and that we need to approach this with more nuance, and that this is just being dismissive of the realities of game development and things like that.
I guess, like I said, it goes back to I'm in favor of any solution, any actual solution. I just worry the more the industry gets in on, like, I mentioned in my video that there's a lobbying group we're kind of concerned about, has a lot of live service makers. Meanwhile, CD Projekt, a company that has a reputation of caring about preservation, is nowhere to be seen. So they're only going to be hearing from the ones that are, who knows what they'll be saying this is impossible to have a future games with an end of life plan. And if that's who the politicians are listening to, well then, okay, we'd like to do this, but we've talked to a lot of companies and they all say it's impossible. So it's,
I imagine they'll be looking for their worst case scenarios and all their fringe cases and putting them up. Another argument that I could see them making is that even in terms of preservation, this is not valid because people can record the games and everything. People can stream the games, and then they'll get people on who are just saying that, oh yeah, I love to watch games. I won't even buy a game. I'll just watch people stream it, and it's just as good for me. And so they can make the argument then, but be like, see, it's video recording and stuff is a valid substitute, and we're never going to get in the way of people recording that.
Yeah, you're right. There is a chance of, but I guess the way I'm looking at it, even if we lose on like all fronts, then it's like, okay, then we're back to where we were before this, except now we know that there's just no opening here. So.
Well, and a lot more people are now informed as a consequence of this movement. So
I think it'll fade over time. Like if we don't have a win, I think some people remember.
I don't know, because as more of these live service games, I'm on Twitter like every other day saying how live service games are not a viable business model. And, seeing what's happening with Bungie and Destiny right now is only further proof that, if the biggest live service game is failing right now, what does that really say? But I think people who are fans of these games and stuff, like Destiny fans, are like in a constant state of, like, especially right now, they're practically in mourning because they realize this game's going to be gone in a few years. Bungie might be gone in a few years. And I think as more and more cases of that happen, I think more people are going to start to get sick of this shit. And they're going to look back at this, if it doesn't pass, they're going to look back at this in like 5-10 years or so and be like, oh shit, we could have done something about this then. We could have actually saved these games.
The thing is, by then, it's all going to be too late unless somebody else thinks they can. What are they going to do about it, I guess, is the point. If they're sick of it. I mean, you think players aren't sick of, like, having microtransactions and for every little thing in games, or it being you get the basic edition for $60, now $70, but in order to get the full thing, you have to pay $100 or $120 or whatever it is. I mean, they're sick of that, but that hasn't stopped. So it's
yeah. I think actually helping gamers understand that, hey, did you know you have rights? I think that could go a long way towards at least informing people, so that the next time that this question gets asked, there isn't as much fist shaking, that we don't have all of the nitty gray areas of weird fringe cases locked down.
I think you guys are more optimistic than I am. I'm seeing this as the last stand, pretty much. Like if we either win on this or we lose permanently.
That is a good way to be looking at it if you're the one who's running it, because that means you're just going to give it your all. And I do agree. Like that's when you start something, it's best to take it to the end, take it to the ultimate end. So
I think what the movement needs is, it needs a Destiny to die and not be revived. It needs like a really popular game to go down, and it doesn't get that server emulator.
It's happening to Destiny right now as we speak.
But there's no guarantee that they're not gonna figure out how to make it work with the number of people that play Destiny. That's kind of the gambit of it, is it has to go down and be non-functional, and then a lot of artistry has to be lost, and then you'll get like more normal people to care.
Yeah, I think it's that same dynamic again, though, where it's all, by the time the axe falls, it's always a minority of the players left. So you would have to have a spectacular screw up on a major game, like within the after the first year or something like that. Because if it's really screwed up early on, then they usually get refunds. And
Destiny is a very strange game. It is it's a fringe case. It's very much played by people who hate it. So there is a strong kind of nostalgic adoration for earlier Destiny, that there are a lot of people that are kind of just sitting on the sidelines lamenting those good old days. It's not necessarily that Destiny is dying because it's losing interest. Destiny is dying because it was ruthlessly killed by like extremely avaricious sharks that ran it, or that ran Bungie.
Yeah, I guess another counter I would make to that is you were mentioning stuff like Office 365 or Adobe products. Well, yeah, we've seen some competitors to that, but I guess Adobe is getting in trouble for really, like, they're getting in trouble right now for not allowing people to cancel their subscriptions. That's an old scam, so there are laws on that. But beyond that, I mean, do you see Adobe caving and moving away from their subscription model anytime soon?
I don't necessarily see Adobe caving, but kind of the point I'm making is, to get people to care, you need to take something that they really liked away from them, and then say, see, it sucks that your game got killed. Now support the movement.
That's actually part of the reason I couldn't even act on this until this year, because, well, the game we used for that was The Crew, and it's not that was the most popular game ever, but it was big enough. Like, it had up to 12 million players total, so that meant a lot of people were still standing around with receipts. And it was located in France, so like everything lined up just right to take action on it, that I don't think it would have been possible prior, or like 10 times more difficult.
There have been people who are like calling out that 12 million player number.
I'll go ahead and say it. You were called out by Pirate Software for saying that The Crew had 12 million players, suggesting that the figure's too high. How do you quoting feel knowing
Ubisoft.
That you were wrong about that, since Ubisoft said the game had 21 million players?
Well, I'm not sure if they're counting. Are they counting The Crew and The Crew 2 in that number or not?
See, they weren't specific, but I think it's funny.
Yeah, see, I was playing it safe. I was playing.
Yeah, you played it safe.
I had a number before The Crew 2 came out from their blog, which they've now deleted, but other game news reported on it at the time. So I was using their number. I think what he was referring to was, he was interpreting that as like peak player base or something. No, it wasn't that.
But it's irrelevant, because the discourse is how many people bought the game.
Yeah, and the thing is, that doesn't even matter. That's almost irrelevant to the conversation. The only reason I care about the number is because that means I could get enough people with receipts to file complaints to get the Consumer Protection Agency's protection. I mean, I don't like, okay, if you bought an unpopular game for $60 and then, it's turned off, does that mean the law doesn't apply to you because the game wasn't popular? I mean, this isn't
Yeah.
It's a different metric, See that metric only makes sense if you're talking about, well, why don't they keep the servers on? And that's never been our stance. So yeah, of course companies want to shut down servers for games that barely have any players on them. That makes sense. We're not trying to stop that. What we're having issue with is making that dependency so that's the only way to play the game once the support ends.
I have a follow-up question that I want to ask related to the 12 million player thing. What do you think of the idea of game developers unionizing and potentially demanding preservation of their own work for the sake of their resume through their union contract?
I think that would be great, but again, I'm pretty cynical on this.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially when some of the developers seem to be divided from what we've learned.
Yeah, so I wanted to throw out there that, hey, if you don't want the government regulating it, then we could push this through game unions. I'm sure the libertarian perspective will really appreciate us suggesting that we want people to unionize.
My mind's almost not even on there. I'm in more like, this is my only shot at it, is the way I look at it, and whatever happens, happens. I'm just giving it my best shot. I would love to be proven wrong. All these optimistic angles you've been discussing, I'm not saying that's law. I mean, this is just my subjective interpretation of it. Like, I would love to be proven wrong, but I have so little confidence I would bet against it.
Yeah, so another argument Pirate made was that because the crew had 2 sequels afterwards, and it looks like people migrated over to those sequels, that there's no reason for them to even keep the crew 1 around. That this is, like, why bother?
I think in order to say something like that, I think he was upset at the proposal, just period. And then your mind goes from like, okay, I don't like this, and then let's jump to reasons why, and then the reasons may not be thought out that well. I mean, that's such an obviously weak argument, because that's like saying, okay, do you like the original Ghostbusters? Okay, the movie? Or, okay, well, why don't we have newer Ghostbusters movies, why don't we destroy the old original Ghostbusters movies? Because we have new ones. I mean, that's the same logic we're using. So each game is unique for the most part. I mean, unless it's like a remaster or something that's like really close. So
yeah,
it's...
As I understand it, the world in the Crew 1 was actually more detailed on the ground than the world in the Crew 2.
Oh yeah, they actually even removed whole small towns in it. Or somebody did a comparison video of it that's pretty good, where they show like this shuttle launch space base that's removed, amusement park removed. They did the graphics. I swear to God, I feel like a side grade. It's like some things are better, some things seem clearly worse to me. So it's a different game,
Were you surprised that Ubisoft would end up supplanting Electronic Arts as the leading killer of games?
Not really. I see that as like an ongoing competition kind of thing. EA could take back the crown if they wanted to.
EA doesn't seem to want to make games anymore.
I think EA's shopping for a buyer.
Yeah, or hey, they're under the care of Microsoft now. Maybe Blizzard Activision wants to catch up later. It's the whole it's the whole industry except for the good players, but they're kind of in the minority.
Mm-hmm. You started a series titled Dead Game News. Do you consider it to have been an effective resource for activists in the game preservation movement?
Not at all. It was, I mean, there's definitely some educational stuff in there, because earlier I tried starting to report on dead games just to kind of like wake people up and hoping something would happen. Then I realized that wasn't happening. So then I occasionally made ones that were on big concepts that I thought influenced a lot of gaming, that the news tied into that. From my perspective, it feels like I'm like in my promotion video, I compare myself to perhaps Don Quixote here, trying just a completely futile effort that may turn out like that. So this is just to kind of prove to myself that we can stop this or else this is hopeless, and then I can move on either way.
Did it ever get depressing covering so many dying games?
Oh yeah, well I got overwhelmed by it. I mean, that's kind of the reason I stopped. I wouldn't have been able to keep up. See, I don't want to be doing any of this.
Yeah.
I'd rather make like kind of fun, creative, kind of comedy stuff that just doesn't deal with any of this at all. It's just that this is just an issue. It's not the most serious issue out there, but it just never stopped bothering me to find that there was an actual opening that maybe I could actually change this. It's the sort of thing where I would, as huge of a pain in the ass as it's been, I know I would regret it more not taking my best shot at it later than going for it and then knowing, you know?
Do you think there was more that could have been done prior to the initiative to make activism more effective?
Not by me. Like,
all right, so
by others,
it was
sure.
It was strike now or never, basically.
Again, my view is biased. While I've had a lot of help, I feel like none of this would be happening if I hadn't pushed it all, and it would never have happened. That I feel like I'm not trying to sound egocentric. It's just that, again, everything feels like an uphill battle. Like, even the initiative organizers said something of equivalent like, yeah, if you hadn't been pushing on this probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground. So I guess there's just, like, there's a lot of apathy out there. So
well, I want to focus on the pushback that you've been getting online. And I've seen a lot of people just attacking the wording of the proposal. And your video where you had like the slide up and you were saying that you believe it's going to be like a relatively easy win because like politicians like easy victories and things like that. And I know Pirate spent a lot of time just basically fighting you on the way you were wording things. So personally, I kind of agree that some of the wording that you used in there was a little bit... He used the word disgusting. I think that's inflammatory, but I think it might have been a little bit counterproductive. I'm curious, like, why did you go about wording it the way you did? And like, if you could, would you like change it again or something like that? Like, just give some insight into like how that all came to be.
Okay, well, I've said multiple times, even before this really kicked off, I don't think I'm the ideal person to do this. I kept hoping somebody else would pick up the mantle on this, and I could just kind of, boost the signal, kind of cheerlead for it. Stuff like this is one of the reasons I say that, because, look, I have very cynical outlook on a lot of this, and I can't fully turn that off. And so what I was doing there was essentially, I was trying to appeal to sort of the doomer crowd on this, or the people who think that this is hopeless or has no chance, and to just kind of keep it real with what some of the variables are on this. I'm not going, Pollyanna saying, oh yeah, guys, if we just sign, we can do it. Like, because that's not going to resonate with somebody who's just kind of bummed out or doomer on this. But if I say that, like, no, there's actually some pretty cynical reasons this might work, and I was giving my prediction on that, I'm still a little confused why Pirate was so upset at that. I could understand how that could turn off some people, but I think that's probably less than the people it might have roped in. Because here's the thing, like, let's say I thought politicians were demigods that could do no wrong. The strategy would be exactly the same. We would just try to get the signatures, submit the same proposal, and then it's heard before the EU. So again, I compare that to a weather forecast. Like, I'm seeing the weather as being stormy, but I think that can maybe work to our advantage.
I think his issue with it was the optics. And because his whole argument was that this is starting the discussion on the wrong foot, and that it reflects poorly on the industry that, the main guy who's championing it is saying that it's going to be an easy victory, and like it being a bit dismissive of the challenges and everything. Although, sitting here listening to it does not sound like you're being dismissive at all, but that's how it came across to him and some people who were watching it and things like that. And I think that's where a lot of it stemmed from.
Can you tell us what happened?
I guess my big... What?
Can you tell us what happened with Pirate Software? How did your name get term banned on his channel?
I don't even know all the details. I guess a quick run through would be some of his fan base heard about the European Citizens Initiative, so he watched the video and he just gave me a barrage of insults in it. And then so I left a comment saying that, I don't think I'm going to change his mind because it was obvious he hated it, but he misunderstood a lot of it. I also think that wouldn't have mattered because I think he'd still hate it even if he understood 100%. So I offered to discuss it with him and just at least clarify things. I said something like, if you're going to hate it, you can hate what it is accurately. And he gave a reply to that on his stream and said he didn't want to talk. That's when he mentioned the approach I took with this. Then there were some various reply videos. He put out a couple videos in response that still misunderstood it, but again,
each time he says this is the last time he's talking about it, and then he makes another video about it.
I don't know if he said it's the last time he's talking about it. I know there's very few things I'm certain of his views. I know he hates it. I think he also doesn't see. Well, okay, the thing is, it's a values clash between my view and his, because he said in the first video repeatedly, this is not a problem. This is not a problem. Okay, well, if I'm saying this is the biggest problem in gaming, and he's saying that's not a problem, well, it's a clear values clash. So the details of it kind of...
I want to ask, do you know the fact that he is running a game publishing company?
I think some people mentioned that later. I haven't really looked into the details of that.
Yeah, so he runs a company called Offbrand, and they're an indie publishing game, and they're coming out with their first game, which is purported to be a live service.
Well, I mean, it's not. None of this is banning live service games. It was just requiring an end of life plan. But even then, I don't think it's.
But this sounds like
I don't see it very productive to focus on him. I mean, he's made it very clear what his stance is. I mean, I guess it helps your channel for the drama from it, but that's not where my mind is at all. Like,
he's the main opposition, and he's controlling the search algorithm in terms of if you look up "Stop Killing Games," his video's on top.
Yeah, though I think our biggest enemy isn't like him being totally against it. I think it's just getting people aware of it in the first place. We're more of a spot where any news is good news, because
if he's successfully poisoning the well, like for example, Private Sessions, I don't know how he saw the video. I think he saw off of my tweet about it, and then he was immediately a skeptic just from watching Pirate Software's take on it. So there's a possibility that it is poisoning the well for a lot of people.
Yeah, but some of that's to be expected anyway. Well, I guess there's two parts of that. One is, since then that helped motivate me to release, because it wasn't just him that was misinterpreting it. There were some others. So I made a big video frequently asked questions on it that should cover 90% or more of what this is about. It may not answer every last question, but you shouldn't be confused about what we're doing if you watch that video. So now I figured the people who are trying to get to the bottom of this can see that should clear up almost everything. And I don't know how much more I can do with that, because he's a much bigger YouTuber than I am. This channel is like, 7 times mine? So it's it's... I gotta work with what I have.
If he's arguing from a questionable bias, then I think that the ethics of the situation could be called out, and he can be undermined in that way.
Well, I also have to question his tactics here, and if he's being disingenuous, because he's saying he wants to have a discussion on it. Like, his whole entire point is that this is the wrong discussion, but it doesn't sound like he wants to have a discussion at this point. Otherwise, he would have agreed to at least talk to you and hear you out.
You know what? I look at it, it's like, it's a free country. He can say what he wants. Yeah, it probably doesn't help the campaign that he's saying it, but I put up the information for the people who are kind of confused or maybe not sure about this. So it's up there. My focus is way more on just getting more people who haven't even heard of this, like from other demographics, because that's way more practical for us. I mean, I'm not expecting everybody to agree with this. If anything, I think he kind of is the face of people who don't agree with this. So it's like, okay, well, makes it easier to choose camps then, I guess.
But I feel like there's three stances in this situation. You're either
Okay.
pro killing games, you're pro not killing games, or you're in the middle. But if you're in the middle, then you should just be talking to the not killing games people
well,
about
no,
how they can
I
improve their initiative and why they don't support it.
No, I think you left out the largest demographic: people who don't know or don't care. See, the people who don't care, they're not for it, but they're not against it either. They're just whatever.
Right. Well, I
So,
think
I
in
think
the
that's
realm of
most
people who are
people,
talking
you know?
about this,
Yeah.
like if
No,
there
well,
is a fundamental problem with the initiative, then the only good faith thing to do is either don't engage with it or try to come up with a way that it can be improved.
Well, that's a point I tried to make in my video, is that if you're undecided about this, or if you think we're going about this wrong, but you think you have a better way, well, then that can be a productive discussion. But if you're against this and you don't have another way, well, the logical conclusion from that is that it's going to perpetuate the practice because there's no action in the other direction if you continue on that trajectory. So we're not really factoring that crowd in too much, because in practice, maybe in spirit it's different. In practice, they're against the solution, either our solution or another solution. So it's like, if you're playing like a football game, you're not exactly going to go to the enemy team for advice. It's like that.
But it's really weird for somebody that's on the consumer end of things to be pro killing games.
I think so, but I'm not used
But
to.
I really don't see a
stuff by
valid.
now.
I don't really see a valid interpretation short of like just obstinate paranoia of giving government any power.
Well, there could be concern that like developers don't get the grandfathering option or something, or that this is just any amount of extra work. That, like, again, in my video, I compared it to something like seatbelts, where in the 60s, where car companies really fought trying to have seatbelts in cars mandated. And yeah, that was an extra expense and more work, and still is, but it's a very small component of manufacturing cars now for the total cost and effort.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like speculation on both sides about how much or how little work this will end up being for developers now and developers in the future. And I think, like the people who are skeptical or against the proposal are looking at it being like, well, it's difficult for games to be made already as is. Do we really need to be making things even more difficult and roping in governments at the same time?
It's not difficult for the people that are running live services, though, because the implication of that is that this is somehow affecting indie game developers who are almost all across the board not participating in the practice to begin with.
Oh yeah, well, that's an excellent point. Most games won't be affected by this, like either now or in the future.
Almost everybody's already compliant, so we're just trying to regulate the 1% of games that are run in this manner.
Yeah, I mean, no, I can understand there's opposition, but it's the sort of thing I think most people won't get it until their game that they care about gets destroyed, and by then it's way too late. So it's an uphill battle on this. So.
I think it's weird to oppose this if you're not either a developer or a publisher. If you're on the consumer side, I don't think you have any reason to.
Well,
either
there's
oppose or.
There is the crowd that sees any government involvement as bad, and I think that's kind of one-dimensional thinking, but plenty of people think that, so I can understand there being opposition. That's why I'm not surprised by it, but I think, look, I bet if you were to take like 100 random people or 100 gamers or and people in the game industry into a room and then like see, okay, who is in favor of this, who's against it. I bet you'd have 80-90% in favor. So
Well,
it's
a lot of the opposition
if they were if they were forced to choose. Yeah.
A lot of the opposition I've seen has just been against this initiative specifically because they believe that it's the wrong. Once again, it goes back to like how it was worded, how the website is worded. Just like that, they have the the notion that you guys don't know what you're talking about, that you never involved developers in the discussion and things like that. And I think a lot of people are just fighting it, not really in the spirit, but just like how this is being presented and how this is being fought.
Once again, I've said I've never thought I'm the ideal person for this. There are probably others out there who could have messaged this much more slickly than I have. I guess the other thing, one, there's some good news if you think that. Most of our consumer action is already underway. We're waiting on government to find out what the answer will be. So it could be this initiative's not even needed. I would be thrilled if that happens. And the other thing, at least from my perspective, there's not going to be anything past this. So if it is flawed, I mean, I'd say because I'm not sure there is an initiative for the people who say it's flawed that they would be satisfied with. I'm not sure that could even exist conceptually under the constraints that it falls under. If this fails, this is it. So if you don't like it, okay, well then you're missing the last train out of the station, but that's your choice,
The only question I had left that I haven't been able to work in was that going all the way back to when we were talking about releasing like server binaries and stuff, there's an argument made against it that it would open up these developers to security issues, or it could open them up to abuse where situations where, and this is the one that Pirate proposed in his second video, that if this is legalized, it basically creates a legal way for bad actors to destroy games to then get a copy of like their binaries and stuff and then create their own servers and monetize off of it.
I love this conspiracy theory.
It's interesting.
It's one of the most insane things I've ever heard.
He also, I have to get it off my chest. He also misrepresents the Team Fortress 2 issue because he like one of the things he was saying is that you would get bots, you would attack via bots, you would release exploits, you would destroy their community and stuff, destroy their Reddit, and basically just go out of your way to make it as difficult as possible for this company to function, for this game to function. And it would be so cost prohibitive that either they would just close the game down, in which case they have to release the binaries, or they go out of business, in which case they also have to release the binaries. And in either case, like,
and then the bot companies like start hosting their own servers and so
too, but in this he said like Team Fortress 2 was under attack by bots, but as far as I'm aware, that's not what was going on with Team Fortress 2. It was like bot farmers that just overran the game because Valve had been negligent over the years. But he made it sound like this was a concerted effort by groups to try to destroy Team Fortress 2 with bots, and that would
kind of... Let's just tackle are bad actors going to intentionally kill games?
Yeah.
I was going to say that would kind of work against his argument because you're not getting a different build of Team Fortress 2 if that goes down. So if they're doing that right now before any of this is even in effect, then
his argument was
hypothetical.
Yeah, he was using it as a hypothetical because he was saying that it's possible. It's very possible for bad actors to do this and that they can do it right now, and that there is examples of like distributed or coordinated attacks against games, and he used Team Fortress 2 as an example, which I was saying I'm pretty sure that's misrepresenting what was going on.
I just want to say the obvious thing, which is that if this scenario were to happen, the server binaries are out there, so you don't even have to pay the people that killed the game for the access to their servers because everybody got the server binaries.
Yeah.
So in that extremely far-fetched scenario,
that's something that's covered in my video. It just if the thing. I mean, I could get into the weeds on it again if you want me to, but the thing I would look at is, okay, is this scenario going to be such a threat that we need to destroy all online games, or 98% of them, the way we do now? That's because, like, always compare the alternative to the scenario you're worried about. I think your average person wants to play the game that they paid money for, and aren't trying to sabotage it. And another point I made is, the experience of the game tends to be better while it's being supported. So most people like to see support continue onward and maybe get new updates and new content or bug fixes, that sort of thing. So it's kind of in the majority of customers' interest to keep the game going as long as it can. I mean, this is all for kind of the worst case scenario. Another point I made was, okay, let's say it shut down. Well, I think the only people that would be entitled to the server software would be the paying customers. So, if they're just, if they come in there and try and sabotage and they're banned, well, then they're kind of banned for the duration. I mean, it's not, and they paid for that privilege to get banned. So, I mean, it gets complicated unless you're looking at like a specific game. But I think the burden of proof would be on, he pointed to TF2 as an example that's getting overrun. Well, that's happening right now. So the burden of proof is to see, well, would this be that much higher than things are already? Because I tend to think of a lot of games for multiplayer as being susceptible to getting overrun by hacks or cheats. And in the video, I mentioned how Bungie even sued one cheat maker because it got so bad. And yeah, actually, one point you brought up, I'm not even sure of the answer, about, like, let's say the game company went bankrupt. Well, if they went bankrupt, all these penalties would very likely be financial anyway. So you might not even be guaranteed a end-of-life build if they're going bankrupt. Because what are they going to do? Find the company? Well, the company's dead.
Yeah, I feel like some people don't understand that aspect of how it's being enforced. We're not gonna make a law where EA goes to jail because they killed a game. There's gonna be an agency, and that agency is going to sue companies that violate these regulations, and then they're going to fine them if they're found guilty of violating so-and-so regulation. So if they go out of business, they're out of business. Like, you can't enforce them.
Yeah, and this one, if game company goes bankrupt without an end-of-life plan, yes, that game dies, but then we're kind of all in the same boat together, because most companies don't want to go bankrupt. It's so...
Yeah, and it's in their interest. How many times has it happened where a company went bankrupt and then took their live service out, like, the same day? It's not very often.
With Redfall, kind of. Like they added an offline mode to Redfall as the studio is being shut, but I think it still does have de novo in it, so it's not quite all the... Or Knockout City, I think, although I don't know if the studio died or if the game just got shut down, but they had to shut down the game, and they added private hosting on their way down.
In the case of Redfall, Microsoft didn't go out of business. It was just Arcane Austin that was closed. So that's not even like a bankruptcy situation. And Microsoft could still get in trouble if they shut down Redfall without an end-of-life plan.
Well, if this passed.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the issues Pirate had was with enforcement, because he was saying that you would have to create some sort of registry for all the different IPs and figure out what IPs are, like, protected under this, what are exempt and stuff. And he just
thinks that exists, doesn't it?
Would be unenforceable.
Well, I mean, we're...
Doesn't the Copyright Office already have a registry of all intellectual property? So...
Yeah, so whoever the rights holder... Okay, so fine, let's say a company goes bankrupt and EA or somebody buys them out. Well, now EA can sue somebody if they violate the intellectual property. Yeah, the intellectual property would not be transferred. We're just talking about, like, individual customer copies of the game, so you can run your copy of it.
That whole section,
because you buy...
that whole section was predicated on the assumption that bad actors are somehow managing to be the only ones with the server binaries that are running the servers after they take down Valve and Team Fortress 2.
Yeah, and again, if the company goes bankrupt, they might not get anything because then, you know.
Well, let me explain how bankruptcy actually works. So when you go bankrupt, you usually hold an auction during the process. It depends what type of bankruptcy you're going for. But the most common one is like Chapter 11. And what you end up doing is you start holding auction on different properties and stuff. It's very rare, especially in the game industry, for a company to go belly up and not have all of its IPs get bought out at the end of it. Somebody will buy something, even if it's for like $10, they'll buy it. In which case, they are now the right holders to that. In which case, they are now the ones who would be liable to enforce it if the government isn't enforcing it already. More likely, the government will enforce it on behalf of the right holders, how it already works with copyright law.
See, this is where it would all depend on the lawmakers because, maybe they own the intellectual property.
That I was going to make too is that
but they may not be on the hook for what the past company did. They could just be okay. This is our intellectual property, but we're not handling any support for that previous game that was on that other. Maybe the law says that's fine. I have no idea. And
that was going to be my next counterpoint to this whole thing is that people are saying that because the initiative doesn't have all the answers, it's a flawed initiative. But the whole thing is that you shouldn't have an opinion on how it's going to be enforced because that's up to the lawmakers to decide.
We're not at that step yet.
Yeah, we don't have the power or the authority to make a fully comprehensive initiative. So there are gray areas in it. So yeah, if that's your requirement, then it is a flawed initiative. But I don't see any other alternative.
That's
I'm coming from.
One of the main arguments I've seen against this is that it's like the vagueness of it. But the thing is that the vagueness exists because you do not have the authority to make those decisions. That's where the lawmakers and the people who are going to be going in.
It's a citizens' initiative, not not lawmakers.
Exactly. So
judges.
It's a breakdown in education about the democratic process and what responsibilities each party has.
I've been so happy.
You have an American looking at a European thing. European Union operates differently than America, so.
Yeah. That's precisely why I'm operating on this in Europe.
We're dealing with a lot of things that people aren't fully, aware of. And it's just, I think that is leading to a lot of miscommunication here.
Hey, I probably could have done this better. No, I'm not denying that in any way. I'm stumbling around the best I can. And from my perspective, it feels like I'm it. So,
I mean, you've got
I'm
250,000 signatures in the EU of countries that are non-English speaking. So, you got to give some credit.
Yeah, I'm trying my best on this, but I've said from the beginning this has always been an amateur effort, and I would have loved so much to just have just some major YouTuber with a lot of resources just hire some people to handle this and he's promoting it. That would have been like a dream come true for me on this. Instead, it felt like, it's either me or nothing. It's how it's felt like on all this. So I would love to be wrong too.
Well, we've still got time. We've still got a year. I'll say this is how you get Asmongold to care. Asmongold. Now he's going to watch this clip.
Yeah, he's been I said uphill battle and everything. He's not him. He's been a help. He's been helping carrying water for us.
Yeah. He's the person who actually kind of got me to flip before I saw your FAQ video. I started watching his thing. I was just he started kind of putting it into better terms for the average consumer, I feel like. And I started to pick up some of the more nuances to the issue. I was like, oh wait, Asmongold, he actually kind of gets it. And he's also he's kind of in the middle too, because he's not really looking at it from a preservation perspective. He's looking at it more from the consumer protection standpoint. And with that side, he's very much in favor of the whole issue because this isn't just a issue about preservation. It really is a consumer rights issue as well. but you just don't want to really go that route because it's so, you know, complicated. You don't want to go fully into that.
Yeah, it's entirely both. I mean, my motivation behind it is 100% on the preservation angle. Like, I just hate seeing games destroyed, but that's not going to get us very far legally. So all the legal stuff has been just almost entirely consumer focused.
Anything you've just thought of since you released the giant FAQ video that needs to be out there? Obviously, go to stopkillinggames.com.
Yeah, all I would say is if you think you've been swayed by this at all, or you're support of it, and you think you might know anyone who's in the European Union that could sign this, try and reach out to them. It's very awkward because I'm an American. My audience is primarily American, but this all depends on Europeans. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely an odd dynamic. So
there's
people
a lot
like
of
in
Euros
between
in the
are
audience.
critical. What?
We have a lot of Euros in the audience.
Okay, the people who can kind of bridge the gap there are just critical. So like you have way more influence on this than you might realize.
If you haven't, check out the giant FAQ. I actually think it's a really good resource that can be used if you are talking to somebody about this and they're disagreeing with you. Just check that out, see what Ross says, and
like I said, the first 5 minutes had most of my reservations answered.
Yeah, so you should be promoting that video.
Yeah,
as something people need to watch.
See, yeah, I guess in retrospect, I should have just come out the gate making a long video. See, the first promotion was like 10 minutes. I figured, okay, well, then people can sit around for that. The FAQ is 40, though I tried to prioritize the more important stuff at the beginning. So it's not for everyone, but maybe that's what was needed. So who knows?
I have a couple questions I've been asked to ask. Are you still making the movie?
Not at the moment, but it's 100% on my list as soon as I get out of this swamp on all this.
I
will. Yeah, that's the better
you
way.
will. You will one day. Are the rumors of your replacement by a black mold creature true or not?
No, I still feel about the same. And that kind of reminds me of an old Onion article about body of real Michael Jackson found on Neverland Ranch or something. It was...
All right, well, that should be LARP number 8 done. Go check out stopkillinggames.com. We won't shill anything else. It's really important, guys.
Thanks for even mentioning it. Yeah.